There's honestly been so many videos I want to do for DC Dual Force that it was difficult to find a way to put this into the schedule, and really I should have talked about this last week because that's when this was confirmed. That's right, this is not a hypothetical video. Draft mode has been 100% confirmed for DC Dual Force. It's a little bit unclear when we're next going to get our hands on DC Dual Force, but back when the streamer beta was initially announced, they snuck in a pretty exciting announcement. They talked about all the exciting things you'll be able to do during the beta, but they also mentioned a few core exceptions that are still in development but coming soon. These include ladder play, that's just ranked. Crafting, that's obviously how you're going to obtain cards that you otherwise wouldn't have access to. So for example, the exclusive promo cards that you only get from the gold subscription. If you want to learn more about that, I've got a video, I'll link it in the description. That's how you'll be able to craft those cards. Again, we don't know the exact details of crafting, but we know you'll be able to take the extra cards you own, convert them into resources, and then turn those resources into cards that you don't own. New comics each week that will be added, and at the very end of the paragraph, booster draft play. There's a lot of unanswered questions about what that means exactly. If you've played draft mode in other games, you might refer to it as arena or expeditions or something along those lines. And I'm sure DC Dual Force will be symbiotic with some of those game modes that you've played in other games. I'm not going to speculate on any of the outcomes to the questions that we ask in this video. I'm just going to present the different options, the different branches, the different questions the development team probably has to ask themselves during the development of a draft mode. Asynchronous versus synchronized drafting. What do I mean by this? So basically, there's two ways you can do a draft system. One is an asynchronous method. You've probably experienced this in expeditions or arena or whatever your favorite draft mode is in digital formats, because most digital formats use a asynchronous draft system where you draft from your own individual pool of cards. A synchronized drafting system is similar to what you have to use in the real world rather than in a digital format. In the real world, you open up a bunch of booster packs, and then one by one, you take cards from the pack until the pack is depleted. Eventually, everyone ends up with a deck, and that's that. The most appealing thing about synchronized drafting is that when you take a card, you're effectively denying everybody else that card. The only problem with a synchronized drafting system is that if we're drafting together and I can deny you cards, but I don't end up versing you, what was the point of me denying you cards? So you would need to verse the same pool of opponents that you draft with, which opens up a whole other host of issues. If I verse one of those people I was drafting with in round 1, and then we move on to round 2, but their round 1 takes an extra 15 minutes compared to my round 1, do I have to just sit around and wait for 15 minutes? The asynchronous method is essentially the answer that digital developers have gone with for that problem, which is that you just draft from your own pool of cards, and then once you've got your however many card deck, you just verse random opponents who have done a similar process, but with a different pool of cards. The next question the team has to ask themselves is, what is the method of drafting? There's a ton of different methods they can use for drafting. Hearthstone Arena probably has the simplest drafting method, which is that you're shown 3 cards, usually a couple commons and a rare. Every so often you'll get an epic, and then every so often you'll get an ultimate card, a legendary card. Legends of Runeterra uses kind of like a bucket system, where you might pick up a bucket of cards that all share the same keyword. That would be interesting for Dual Force because we have a lot of buckets that work well together, like the Green Lanterns, for example. They could go with some type of booster pack system, where instead of selecting between 3 options like you do in most digital drafting systems, you instead open up some number of packs, and then from those number of packs, you build a deck. That'd be certainly interesting, especially because you pull leaders from packs in this game. And from there comes a bunch of other questions, like would the packs work the same way that they do on the menu? Because if they work the same way you do in the menu, when you pull a leader during pack openings, you can get additional packs. So if you did packs in a draft format, could you get more packs than some of the other opponents based on the number of leader packs you got? Like if you somehow luckily enough got 6 leader packs, you would end up with an additional 12 packs compared to your opponents, assuming that they got no leader packs, but of course they're never going to get no leader packs. Yeah, lots of interesting questions about that. And then do you mess with the drop rates in a draft format if you do with booster packs? Perhaps maybe the drop rates are increased, so that way you have access to a wider range of cards instead of most commonly just getting, commons. Again, I won't speculate on which of these 3 options they're going to go with, but that's just an example. The next question to ask about draft is, will the draft system break the core rules of deck building? The simple rules of deck building in DC Dual Force are as followed. You have 2 leaders. Those leaders can either be from 2 different factions or 1 faction. If you select 1 faction, you must build a deck of exactly 40 cards from that faction. If they're from 2 different factions, you must build exactly 20 cards from each faction. Will the draft system break those rules? In draft, could I have an 18 to 22 split? Could I have a 10 to 30 split? I said I wouldn't speculate too much on these questions, but my current guess is they will not break any of the core deck building rules. The next question is, do you pick your leader first, or do you build your deck and then pick your leader? It's a very important question. If you've done any theory crafting about DC Dual Force, you know that the relationship between your leader and your deck is very important. If I draft a bunch of cards that are spell-related cards, but I don't have a Zatanna to back it up, probably not going to be a great build. Most of the spell-related cards all ask you to have either a spell in your hand or have a spell recently be played, or have a lot of spells be played throughout the game, and Zatanna's the core engine for making that work. If I don't hit Zatanna, but I have all these spell support cards, I'm going to be in a rough spot. But the same thing can be said the other way around. If I pick, I don't know, Black Adam as one of my leaders, and I see very few 5-attack cards throughout my draft, it's going to be pretty hard to get any value out of that Black Adam. With that being said, Black Adam might actually be better in draft than he is in constructed, because I would imagine that draft games are going to be slower than the average constructed game. And then my final question about draft mode deck building in DC Dual Force is, what is the exact order? We just talked about leader versus deck, but let's say we have two different factions. Do we draft leader, then the 20 cards for that faction, then the other leader, and then the 20 cards? Or do we go leader, leader, then 40? Or do we go 40, then leader? Or do we go 20, then leader, then 20, then another leader? All of these are very core fundamental design decisions that the team needs to make before draft mode can be developed. So these decisions have likely already been made behind the scenes. And you see what I meant by a lot of these decisions will inform each other. So for example, the ordering questions we talked about there at the end, those can be very easily informed by the method of drafting. If it's the booster drafting system, then the ordering questions aren't particularly important. Let's say we open up, let's say 30 packs. I have no idea how many packs you'll have to open for the draft system, but let's say you open up 30 packs, and then from those 30 packs, I've got my pool of cards, including some of the leaders that you can pull from those cards. Well, from that point, a lot of the ordering questions are relatively moot. We already know what our full pool of cards is going to be for our deck building process, so they can just kind of throw us into a regular deck building process and just lock all of the cards that we didn't get throughout our draft. I guess one last question I didn't ask throughout this video is, if it is a booster pack method, similar to what we're talking about just now, what about all of the leaders you unlock by default? Some of the leaders aren't in packs because you, again, unlock them by default. Are you not going to be able to use those in draft? Will they be added to the pool of cards you can get from a leader pack throughout the draft system? Are you guaranteed a certain number of leaders throughout the draft system? Oh, and here's a bonus question along the same line. Assuming we have the booster pack system we're talking about, what about all the cards that aren't a part of the Origin set? That includes all of the Shazam-related cards. They're a part of their own mini set. The Green Arrow cards, they're all a part of their own mini set. And all of the promo cards that we'll be getting from the Golden subscription. Are none of those cards included in a draft? Or are the draft packs made up of their own unique pool of cards that is a combination of all of the currently active pool of cards in the game? Lots of unanswered questions, but that's all the fun. And it gives you an idea of just how many different directions that they can take for the drafting system. I'm actually really excited about draft in DC Dual Force, man. The more and more I think about it, the more excited I am. Let me know what you want draft to look like in the comments. Keep being awesome, and I'll catch you in the next one.